Good evening, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us in this virtual space. I am Lorena Kelly. I'm the new Executive Director of SaskMusic. SaskMusic is grateful to be based on and representing a music community of people living and working on lands, which include those of Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, the ancestral and existing territories of First Nations, which include the Cree, Dakota, Dene, Lakota, Nakota, and Saulteaux peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis. We acknowledge that we are in a sacred relationship with this land and with its First Peoples through these treaties. We are grateful for the guidance of an Indigenous advisory as our organization continues on its path of learning and striving to respectfully celebrate the voices of the creators of our region. We are committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I myself am a settler joining from Regina on Treaty 4. I would like to thank David Cox for providing the following language for us to use. As further, we acknowledge with profound respect and humility the centuries-long displacement endured by African peoples from across the diaspora, including but not limited to Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States. Recognizing the immense resilience and enduring contributions of these individuals and communities, we acknowledge the injustices, hardships, and systematic inequities which have been faced. We also honor and recognize the contributions which Black people have made to Canadian society and its cultural richness, and commit to fostering a society which celebrates diversity, equality, and inclusion while striving to rectify historical wrongs and forge a future of harmony and justice for all. SaskMusic believes the arts are integral to preserving, raising up, and celebrating diverse voices. We represent music industry members of our province across race, gender identity, age, religion, disability, and sexual orientation, and we believe a broad mix of minds, musical styles, cultural backgrounds, and individual experiences make for a stronger industry. As a membership-based organization, we strive to encourage, support, and celebrate the many voices of our industry. As board and staff, we are engaged in ongoing learning and listening, reviewing our programming with intent to become more inclusive and culturally aware, providing direct outreach to artists in the community to offer our support, and participating in discussions around equity and advocacy within the arts communities. We are thankful to you all for taking the time to join us this evening. We invite everyone individually and within any organizations you may be representing to reflect on the topics that will be discussed tonight and carry this context forward in consideration with your future activities. This roundtable has been initiated and coordinated through the Breaking Down Racial Barriers Initiative, a Black-led music and entertainment industry roundtable discussion series led by Canadian music and entertainment community veterans Ian Andre Espinet and David Click Cox, presented by the Canadian Independent Music Association, or CIMA, and supported by Advance, Canada's Black Music Business Collective, and CIMA's peer and partner organizations. We are extremely grateful to Ian and David for helping us bring this roundtable to the Saskatchewan community and to the panelists who will be offering their insights tonight. We are also appreciative of our funders, Creative Saskatchewan and the Foundation Assisting Canadian Talent on Recordings. So without further delay, I am pleased to introduce and welcome David Cox.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Lorena. I'd like to, is my camera on? There we go. Now it is. Thank you very much. My name is David Cox, also known as Click, and I'm, I should say, a music professional, being in the industry for over 25 years, wearing many different hats, from artist manager to an A&R to event promoter, many different things. In 2020, the unfortunate murder of George Floyd brought a lot of attention to our industry and a lack of Black professionals and opportunities within the music industry. And myself and my partner here, Ian Andre Espinet, joined forces to create Breaking Down Racial Barriers. In doing so, we've had many conversations with individuals across the country. We've also created a report on anti-Black racism that you can get at BDRB.ca. There was also a declaration signing where we've asked people from within industry, doesn't matter if you're a big company, a small company, individual, to sign that declaration pledging to eradicate anti-Black racism in the industry. Where it's brought us today is obviously here, having this discussion, specifically looking at Saskatchewan and the challenges and the solutions that exist within the Black community. And I'll just put in the chat real quick a link where you can see the report and more information. Feel free to speak with us through the chat, but we will save questions and answers to the very end. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. And with that being said, I will pass the mic to my partner, Ian Andre Espinet.
Hi, good night, good evening all. My name is Ian Andre Espinet. I'm a 25 year, close to a veteran of the music industry, operating primarily in the live event space. Also the owner of a graphic design and communications company in Toronto. And as David said, I am the co-founder of Breaking Down Racial Barriers. Today, we are here to discuss anti-Black racism, specifically in the context and nuance of the Saskatchewan music industry. We brought together a few key experts, subject experts from the Black community. This is a Black led initiative. Everyone is welcomed to input and to listen and learn and to be involved in the conversation. However, priority has been given throughout the BDRB series to Black voices to explain and elucidate the issues that are faced by Black music professionals in Canada, specifically and generally and specifically today in Saskatchewan. So I would like to throw to our guests today to introduce yourselves. So I guess we can start, Xochitl.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Xochitl. I am a musician, artist, songwriter, everything with related to the music arts. One-time nominee, Saskatchewan Music Awards, Contemporary Artist of the Year, 2022. CBC Line Artist, 2023. Music connoisseur. And I also like to refer to myself as the Canadian Queen of Afrobeats. So yeah, thank you guys for having me, and thank you guys for joining as well. And I hope we can have some great discussions tonight.
Cool. Who wants to go next?
I can go next.
Okay.
Hey guys, name's Prince Banks. Lover of music, producer, manager, and just someone who just loves to be around good music. Really blessed and feel happy to be here with you guys, and looking forward to having a great discussion about breaking down racial barriers. Nice to meet you.
Fian.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Fian. I'm really excited and honored to be here. I am a gospel, jazz, R&B singer-songwriter. I also am involved within the jazz community, being on the board of the jazz orchestra recently, and really happy to also do some work, mentorship now with SaskMusic. And yeah, I'm really excited to actually have a platform to have a conversation about what's happening out here in Saskatchewan.
And finally, Pimpton.
Yeah, we're good. Good, check. Hey guys, Kiriel Roberts, also known as Pimpton here. I am a rap artist, hip hop artist from Regina, Saskatchewan, originally born in Trinidad and Tobago, immigrated here in 1994. I've been involved in the Sask hip hop scene since 2008, so I think that's 15 years strong that I'm kind of out here doing the thing and fighting the good fight. I'm extremely proud and stoked to be here to be part of a discussion about solutions that we can come across or discover, or at least put some attention to, so that we can keep advancing just Black art in Saskatchewan as a whole.
Amazing. So we are going to get into it, but in my research, I found some very, very interesting facts pertaining to Saskatchewan. In the 2021 census, the percentage of visible minorities or racialized people in Saskatchewan was 14.4%, of which 14.2% were Black. So Saskatchewan, like Halifax and other provinces across the country, has a very storied history in terms of Black people and immigration, etc. And one of the things that I came across was that between 1908 and 1911, African Americans, many sold their homes from Oklahoma and migrated to Saskatchewan. So, despite the fact that it was something that was fought by the inhabitants at that point, Canadian Black immigrants, and that trend in immigration towards Saskatchewan hasn't changed. The numbers continually go up between 2016 and 2021, with the fifth largest group actually coming from Nigeria. And so the census is saying that the population of Black people in Saskatchewan will double by 2036. And so I think this is a very, very interesting time to have this conversation. Also of note, we won't be speaking specifically about the Indigenous community, because this is a conversation on Black issues and solutions. And as we have noted in BDRB throughout the last 3 years, solutions need to be catered to the groups which they pertain to. But I thought that it was of note that although we will not specifically address the Indigenous community or their issues in this conversation, that there is a population of Afro-Indigenous people and intersectionality of Afro-Indigenous individuals in the province. So that was of note for future, basically for us to stick a pin about. Okay, so I just want to jump in and start speaking to everybody. And across the last 2 years, we've come to the conclusion that the issues surrounding Black music professionals are in a couple of key areas, and one of the most key areas, if not the most key area, and the reason that we collect race-based data and encourage the correct collection of race-based data, is representation. Okay, so I wanted to jump to the panelists and speak to you and ask just a basic question. In Saskatchewan, is there a lack of representation as a whole in the music ecosystem and the associated creative industries? So whoever wants to speak, feel free to go ahead.
I would say yes. There is, to an extent, yeah.
Okay, and what are those areas? Or maybe you can speak to your area of expertise. Are there deficiencies in live? Are there deficiencies in the artist space management, studios, producers? Boards. I noticed, boards. Anybody want to?
Yeah, so there are obviously many Black artists like myself in Saskatchewan, in Regina, that are doing the same kind of work that I do on a professional level. I mean, we have Tova, there's Pimpton, there's Sook from Think Tank, there's Brookie Melodina, there's Nini, there's a whole bunch of us, right? I have my notes here as well, so I'm just going to be looking down here because I have some talking points, just so I don't go off the rails. But when I look at representation, I feel like it comes from the executive level. I think my question would be, is there an intention to promote Black artists? When we have the decision makers in the room and they get together to say, okay, we're putting on a festival or we're doing this, is there that need and that intention to say we need to make sure there's at least 3 Black artists represented at these shows, at least, you know. And when I look at that, I don't really, I mean, yeah, like I don't really see that happening like as often as I would like, you know. So that's the reason why I would say yes, there is a lack. And I mean, we need to have more racialized, you know, what would I call it, jurors, and like um grant reviewers, you know, like when a Black person applies for a grant, like it's cool to know that they can go over and talk to someone that's not in the jury member to help them out. But it's like with the decision makers in the room, is there like a Black person that can actually relate to this body of work and say, oh, this is, we need this here, you know, we need to support this music, because there is like a necessity in the music industry as a whole, whether it in Saskatchewan and also in Canada and also globally, if we're being honest, you know.
So
And
Zoe, can I ask a quick question? So when you
yeah,
said we need more juries, is that because you know firsthand that there's not a lot of Black people that are jury members? Have any of you been a jury member? I'm just curious.
I haven't been a jury member, no. And I know like it's majority of it is white dominated, yeah.
To speak on that, I know as far as like maybe Junos and like certain ones of these kind of organizations, like they do make it pretty open to become a juror. But as like to add to Xochi's point, we just don't actually know. So even to add to David's point, it's like we don't actually know. And I think maybe the idea that we already kind of have the preconceived notion that the machine is already kind of working against us. There are no individuals on those executive sides that are kind of putting their hands up and saying, hey, if you guys need information, come talk to me, I'm right here. If you need help finishing this grant, I'm right here. And that when they say this, they are identifying like, hey, I'm a Black person and I'm right here. I'm not just a person who works for the machine and has kind of been told to fulfill a quota. And I think to me, we always run this like really risky, like we're walking a very thin line, because sometimes as much as we want these moments of inclusion, personally, I don't know if it's a pride thing for myself or what, but sometimes you want to know that those are based on merit and acknowledgement of merit, and not simply checking off a box that said we needed so and so multicultural artists. Just in my opinion, just for me and like what I'm saying in my pride as far as approaching a lot of these processes, it's nice to know that the backing is actually coming from people who have been kind of focusing on your career a little bit, or paying attention and are invested in your growth beyond just fulfilling something in their programming essentially.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Ian?
So, I mean, I noticed, Prince, like in speaking to you, that you've played countless roles. You're a producer, you're a piano player, you're an engineer, and I think, if I'm not incorrect, you've been a manager since about 2016. Out of curiosity, why is it that you play so many roles, specifically in the context of Saskatchewan?
Yeah, no, it's I think it's, you know, just trying to figure out how things work. Because I mean, it's one thing to make this music in the studio, sounds good, everybody's excited, and you know, it's going to be the next big thing, and then you realize what's really the process to getting this music to everyone. I think Regina, I mean, we're getting better, but for a long time we've been at a more primal stage in terms of just like the Black artist and representation and music scene. I think we're just now getting to a point where you can actually like call it a handful of artists. Obviously, you have people like Pimpton who've been, you know, like going forward and representing us. Few other artists, else like of blessed memory, but we're just getting to a point where there's like a real array of like different artists, Afro beats, and you know, and people who want to be heard. But yeah, personally, it's just been, you know, just trying to figure it out. You know, you have the song, you put it on Spotify. Where does it go? How do you really get this music around? How do you get it locally buzzing? And you know, working with different artists. You know, one of my artists has a big, strong YouTube base. So seeing how that works out for him, and And I worked with Kia, who was doing something locally and all that. So I mean, it's just trying to figure it out because there's no master plan, and there isn't really anyone you can go to and be like, hey, I make music. What advice do you have for me? Who can really walk you through the stages? So it's been really more a learning process.
So in terms of you saying there's no one else that you can go to, I think that's what I really like to know is there a generational is there individuals from the community, specifically Black individuals, who have had their fingers in the business side of things that you guys have been able to speak with over the years at all? I'm just curious. Is it because you feel like there's no one for you to go to? I'm just curious.
I mean, if I can jump in, it's hard to just say this universally or like unanimously, but I don't think there are those individuals. Like, I'm 33 years old. The generation of hip hop artists that came before me, I can't say in Saskatchewan, sorry, that many of them were Black. So there were artists that have gotten like the factor love. And when I say factor, I mean like the music association. So factor love. There are artists that have gotten grand placements or major movie placements or whatever it is. But out of those hip hop artists, I would say none of them are Black from what I remember. But sorry, once again, I'm kind of specifying hip hop artists. Forgive me because a lot of times I may kind of just trail back to hip hop. It is what I know. I am aware that there are many, many other Black artists here, but like I'm saying, I don't see it being showcased.
Okay.
So I have not seen it being showcased. I've seen sometimes they've given me a little light. I've seen them give artists after me a little light. I did not grow up seeing Black artists being spoken about in the newspapers or on TV or anywhere about Saskatchewan promoting art. It has not been a focal point. As a matter of fact, I was just at the Reme yesterday. They have a Trinidadian artist on display in there, and if you can imagine how that made me feel, right, to see that their highlight artist or their residency is being occupied by a Trinidadian Black lady, grew up in Toronto, etc. But I can't remember her name off top, so I'm not going to guess. But nevertheless, that representation really matters. And I know that when I started my collective CJE, it was so borderline difficult to not make it look racist in trying to just have Black artists there. So when I started my collective, I wanted to empower Black artists. So I had a crew of 7 to 12 Black artists. But in these moments, it's very difficult, especially in the climate that I was growing up in, to move around at these events with 20, 30 Black artists. Like, it just, you can imagine like how that would feel. And like, we're walking in this room and me being sort of the essentially captain of the team, having to feel responsible for all of these people and how everyone is interpreting and perceiving us at all of these events. And it was literally like not just trailblazing, but just like venturing out. Like Prince is saying, we're just kind of figuring it out. There isn't an OG or some level of guidance above us to say, hey, this is how you speak to these business people. This is how you dress. This is what time you arrive. This is set. Like, you just have to make the mistakes and kind of keep it going and etc. So
Got it.
yeah.
Yeah. If I can go off of that too, I think I agree with what everyone's saying. I think there's a lot of pioneering happening, for lack of a better word, for the Black music industry. Like, the people on this panel kind of represent like that wave of people actually trying to create that. So I think, like, when I think of advisors, for example, I've joined SaskMusic for a while, and the advisor I had was very helpful, but more in the country realm. So she did everything she could to like really help kind of give advice on like grant writing and different aspects. But even she at that time, I think it was like as early as 2016, was like kind of a little bit like not feeling great about the types of artists that were always, in her opinion, receiving grants. And that was coming from her being in the country realm and being able to do so much in that industry. And so even as she was coaching me, she's like, I really hope that there's an openness too from the grant side for them to want to award, like just different styles of music. So I will say that as one. I think there's also like, again, a bit of a misconception, even culturally, about like what is the culture of Saskatchewan. Because like, as you mentioned, there's like, you know, almost 20,000 people statistically, technically, that represent the Black community. So I think there's still, even in our minds and even a lot of people's minds, like a narrative of like, how does Saskatchewan actually look like? And therefore, what music does that population want to see? And so I've grown up seeing obviously way more country, way more rock. Like there was an urban scene. I can't remember the amount of like Black people, like you mentioned, that I've seen in the rap scene, but I know there was like interest. And definitely, I can't speak to Regina, but for Saskatoon, I think some of the spaces where I felt like as an artist, I could show up in that way were spaces like the jazz festival, or like where it's like very obvious that you're allowed to show up with those styles of music, and that's what people are there to see. So they're excited to see it, and it's almost like that's a space for it. On the flip side, it's still a challenge because even with the Jazz Fest, they've at times had to add like country artists as well, just because again, it's that like consumption of like, what does the crowd want to see? So it is a little challenging, and like, yeah. And I think that could be a generation thing, because I know there are a lot of young people into like hip hop music and R&B. So I'm not sure that people don't want to see it, it's that they don't want to know. And then I want to address the issue about like us knowing about the resources. The very first grant I ever got to do a demo was through Sask Arts. And it's because someone saw me singing at a jazz jam and came up to me during Jazz Festival and was like, oh, you sound great. You should do a demo. And you can write a grant with us. And I was like, I've never written a grant in my life. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, yeah, no problem. Come into the office. We'll sit down. We'll walk you through it. Like, they actually went the extra mile to do the invitation. They're like, write what you have.
I want to cut you off there because we will get into mentorship and
cool.
succession.
I'll bring that story back. Yeah.
Can I ask one question since she's speaking? Is that cool?
Go ahead.
Just about representation quickly, not to go deep into it, but just to identify, because I know Soshi and Fian, you both sit on boards, and I just want to know like what you guys are seeing in terms of the space of boards and how Black voices are being heard in those spaces.
I would say being on the SaskMusic board for like a year now, like it's obviously like they're very welcome to like creating more Black spaces in the community. For example, for me as an artist, I started to put out music intentionally to like kind of promote myself commercially in the city in just 2021. And just seeing like how that was accepted as well, like being asked to do the Black History Month and talk about, you know, my Blackness and how that translates with me being in a city like Regina, and also being on the SaskMusic board, like having to hear like people's side of the story from their own, like, I guess from their own cultural lifestyle, and also having to see me and my voice as well be accepted in these meetings. Like, it's been something that I commend a lot, but I still want to go back to like as a musician though, because I feel like that's a very specific hat for a lot of us. It's like Pimpton was saying, like growing up and seeing hip hop shows, and it's not a lot of Black people there though. My question isn't that like the same thing that's, well, it's grown. I would say yes, it's been accepted to an extent. And like I said, like it's cool to know that there's a non-Black person willing to help you extensively when you go to apply to a grant and stuff. But it's like, where is the Black person though? Like, where is the rep? Like, where is the brotherhood? Where's the sisterhood in that space? Someone that can also carry on that knowledge, you know? Like, I feel like for me, that's what I'm looking out for. Like, it's good to be in a space where I feel welcomed and they want me there because they see the need for, you know, someone like me to be in that space. But at the end of the day, I feel like that's just the beginning. Like it's 2023, and it should have been happening a long time ago, because Black people have been here. They've been making music here, you know? So yeah, I would say like being on the SaskMusic board is dope. Like it's tremendous. Like even with the grant applications as an immigrant as well, you know, having to say like I think it was just recently the whole like when if you have a permanent residency, then you can apply for grant and stuff like that. Like that wasn't there as well in the past. So it's like it's cool to see those changes actually happen. And it's only been a year for me, and I'm super stoked about it. But I see a bigger, I feel like it should have been bigger, but you know what? Like one step at a time, but let's hurry up though. Like let's keep talking. You know, like let's go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And sorry if I cut you guys off during the conversation. It's just to keep the ball rolling because we have a lot to cover, and I don't want you guys to feel like this guy's rude. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to keep the ball rolling. Fian, I just wanted to quickly hear your take quickly in regards to what it looks like from the boards you're sitting on. Is there a lot of Black people there? What does it look like? What's representation look like?
For sure. This will be very quick. I'm very new to the Jazz Orchestra Board, and it was like a pretty intentional conversation that I had with the executive director of like why it'd be good to be part of that. But I think I think it's really good for me to be part of that conversation. I think it was a mix of like not only diversity in culture but also age as well, to bring in just like again the next generation of that. So yeah, I wish I had more to share on that, but it's just a very new position that I'm in.
Thank you.
So I wanted to bring the conversation back to representation for a very, very quick minute. Actually, before I do that, I wanted to make a point. I think someone was talking about sorry, my mind is all over the place, but making space by bringing 12 to 15. I think you're talking about this, Pimpton. 15 artists into a collective. Your collective, actually, I know. And you not wanting to make it racist. The other day I was speaking to somebody and they said, "Why is Black History Month necessary?" And I said, because everything that's on television regularly is white. And consequently, it is necessary to make space where space hasn't been made. So in so doing, you're providing opportunities for individuals who otherwise would not necessarily have the opportunity to be represented in spaces. So I just wanted to make that clear right off the bat. But speaking to representation, there were two things that I wanted to note. I noticed that a lot of you, or everybody, spoke about artists. I would like to speak about infrastructure, individuals who are making decisions at music festival. We've spoken quickly about boards of directors, ownership and staff of venues, right? We take a process with BDRB where we ask the question that asks the question that asks the question, right? Are there members on juries? Click asked earlier. Are there members on judging or committees, etc.? If there are not, why is that? Is it an outreach problem? Is it an access problem? You know what I mean? Like, and like I'd love for you guys to speak to the infrastructural things in Saskatchewan in terms of these spaces and how many people that you see in these spaces who are in decision-making positions, who can, whether it be the granting bodies or the committees or the judging or the juries, or creating the processes by which these things are done. You know what I mean? Because I think it's very important that we are represented beyond the stage in the media spaces, the people who decide which stories get greenlit, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if anybody would like to speak to that, but I'm very curious.
I think in terms of like infrastructure, as you said, definitely need a lot more Black representation for sure. Just from my perspective, again, I'm not on any board in SaskMusic, so I don't know from the insides, but just from what I see, and obviously, part of it is because country has been the major focus. And rightfully so, because there have been handful of successful artists, and we're Black people are just starting to get more populated, and we have more artists now. But yeah, definitely, even in like they're in, I don't know of any black owners who own auditoriums, stages, events. I mean, I know a couple, but most of them are white. So yeah, definitely need more representation in that, and in the structure, especially in just just creating more events and more outlets for for more music events and artists to kind of just showcase their talent and all. Yeah.
Do you find that there are individuals who are in decision making in festivals, or do you see representation in from the like what we call from the boardroom to the floor? Like, do you see lighting individuals? Do you see studio engineers? Do you guys, and we'll speak about this in the artist section, but do you see representation in those areas, and what do you see change looking like? What are the causes of those barriers? We've discovered that in certain areas that apprenticeships are needed, or internships. Like, what do you see the causes of the barriers for Black music professionals in the first place, and what solutions do you see that can assist in the creation of a more representative Saskatchewan music industry?
Yeah,
If I'll jump in,
yeah.
or no, go ahead. Sorry.
If I could say just briefly, I guess from my experience, I think that it's like a bridge between, like, it's almost like there's this wall or this like gap that needs to be filled. So I think it's the communication happening internally within our communities. There's a lot of talented people that have never seen the mainstream limelight, for lack of a better word. And then I also think it's partially the associations not knowing where to start in looking, and like also to make that effort to like make the invitations. A lot of my opportunities have come from people inviting me into this space, as opposed to me just knowing that was an opportunity that existed. And I think a possible solution could be more outreach. There are a lot of Black ethnocentric groups, for example, that maybe these associations could be doing outreach and like workshops and saying like, this is what we do, these are some opportunities. And some of these ethnocentric groups, like if I think about the Nigerian Association, represent like 800 members. Like there's a lot of people. And so I think the assumption is, oh, it's a cultural group, for example, there's not going to be anything there, but that could be like a gold mine. And I think those are some of the things that some of these associations, if they're doing their marketing traditionally on how they've been getting people, when it comes to some of these unique communities, I think it's opportunity to build relationship and meet them where they're at. And that's just one cultural group. There's so many. And so I think just thinking outside the box a bit on how you want to start that relationship and then present those opportunities.
I think, Xochitl, you kind of alluded to the concept of ambassadorship as well. And, to your point, Fian, somebody was speaking to me the other day and they said, my company is not really in the music business. They were from an alcohol company. And I was like, but your alcohol is sold in music venues, so you're in the music business. I think that there's a tendency to think that cultural groups or churches or these unconventional spaces that you're speaking of, Fian, are not in the music business per se. However, culturally speaking, Black people are in the music business. Culturally speaking, whether it be the church or it be the Nigerian organization. Some of you on this call, I don't want to call out everybody's stuff, but obviously some people are steel pan players. There's a Trinity on the call, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's individuals who are doing jazz. There are individuals who are doing different types of music, and you guys operate in different intersectionalities and in different spaces. So to your point, I think that that unconventional ways of doing these things and outreach into those communities, in those spaces, might be a specific thing that assists in growing your audiences. And to your point, Fian, invitations. So to the organizations that are watching, not just SaskMusic, but all the folk music organizations and jazz organizations, etc. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to invite membership free of charge for a year, or whatever the case may be, or put, we encourage the use of equity statements in your advertisements for employment, etc., etc. So, I mean, these are all things that we can talk about, but going down the line. Click.
I think Pimpton, you were gonna jump in there as well. You had something to say, didn't you?
Yeah, I was definitely going to touch on the essentially outreach topic, but just to maybe push it a little further, I think, I think as a black person who still has to make ends meet, incentives are very important for creating these outreach opportunities. Like someone needs to be told, hey, we're hiring, you have this as a paycheck, we need you to meet so and so, like whatever your itinerary is. You may even, as seeing as how they may be a little removed, they may even suggest like, hey, you just need to meet with 5 organizations a month and we'll cut you this check. And doing so, maybe recruit 1 to 2 people per organization or whatever, something along those lines. But some kind of structured idea where people have an incentive to leave their houses to go seek artists or opportunities or ways to advance the black culture. Because it's just like to say make or have these folk people or whoever, whatever other organizations kind of take it upon themselves to reach out to us, there's just a little bit of waiting and, you know, lack of proactivity involved in that. So I think if there's a way that even I mean, right now I'm almost brainstorming, trying to figure it out as I speak, but a way to make sure that as black individuals we know, so it there, that's what it comes down to. It comes down to the information and the accessibility to that information. We don't always know what events are about to take place. We don't always know who we should be reaching out to, but if there is a way to make sure that there's a financial incentive for us to know these things, I think a lot of people will kind of like use their free time more so to seek these opportunities or to create these opportunities rather than being passive and almost having to wait for them to present themselves to us.
Well, I do know Sask Music has an individual there, Rookie, I think it is, who,
Rookie, yeah.
right,
Yeah,
who's
and
definitely
that honestly, I remember having a meeting with them, and I'm not sure how long, but whatever it was, seeing Rookie there, like, and seeing what he's trying to do with them, it is very positive. And I do have to acknowledge that SaskMusic is taking these steps. But this is this is present. As Zochi was kind of saying about how long black artists have been here, it like there's just that part as well that,
right.
someone, an artist like me would feel because I've been doing the grind almost independently for so long. But I'm so thankful and hopeful that even like events like this are allowing us to take those steps. So I am seeing the brightness in the future.
Yeah,
But to speak on it, like, yeah.
I think that's a great solution, please. And I would love just to go around the room real quickly. If each one of you could share, like, is there a solution that you think could assist in the creation of more representation in the space? Is there some ideas that you guys feel kind of similar to what you just said, Pimpton? Other things that you think would make a difference in the communities out there?
And specifically in your own like areas of expertise.
I mean, in terms of also production, because that would be my major. I mean, there are not too many producers. We're still coming up. I know a handful. There's, Martin, Tony Hayes, a couple other people. But I think there needs to be, for us to get to representation, there needs to be kind of a structure within ourselves, whether it be as artists, producers, coming together and identifying as, hey, we're Black creatives, we're Black artists, we're Black producers coming together. And then it'd be easier to come in one voice and be able to be represented. Because for a lot of these people, they don't know. A lot of them, you'd be surprised, are actually oblivious to the fact that there are a handful of Black artists, right? Because I mean, music is kind of like food. You like what you like, and most times you're just going for the same thing, right? And then sometimes you need to be educated that, hey, and I mean, obviously, a lot of people who live in Saskatchewan, you're surprised, won't have a lot of Black friends. So when you try to invite them to a community or a place where there'll be Black music and stuff, they're kind of uncomfortable, which is understandable, right? So I mean, there needs to be like that synergy, or that's just that. I don't know, maybe it's more events in neutral spots where people can come and not feel like, hey, because I mean, you invite people to this place, like, well, I don't go there, it's ghetto, or I don't, you know, and it's not even being racist, it's just because they don't. And it's like, hey, how about this event where you can come and, you know, get to meet different artists, and then you just, it's information really. But again, as I said, structure between creatives, it's artists, producers, that oneness. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Soshi
Yeah.
and Vian, do you have any solutions you'd like to add?
Yeah, it's kind of along that same line though, but I would just say like the government should like regulate the amount of racial artists in the province the same way that they do on radio. Um, Again, there needs to be a hub for racial artists where we can, like Prince was saying, get together and meet one another, build that community. Board of directors at the arts and culture nonprofits, they should have more racial Black representatives. I still feel like the executive pointed things to needs to change for sure, because those are the decision makers at the end of the day. Yeah, I would like pretty much same thing that Banks was saying, and we need to hear more. Like for example, like Black Exposed, like the only Black, like all Black Canadian music. Like we need that same kind of thing in Saskatchewan. You know, Black Exposed by Sandra Tyler. We need that here in Saskatchewan, like a radio station that goes and plays like Black artists in Saskatchewan's music. You know, so I think there need, like, because there's a lot of us too, like even the Black people in these spaces too. It's like we need to stand together and like stand up for ourselves. Like I don't know, like there's a way that we can actually push it forward and say, okay, I'm a Black person, I represent this, so let me bring together like the Black community too on this level. But I don't see that happening, and I think that needs to be like a provincial thing as well, like a regular, like a, I don't know if it's possible. I don't know nothing about politics.
Well, I think what you're getting, I think your solution based what you brought to the table is just a hub space, but at the same time you are reflecting that there also needs to be representation in some of these art funding bodies on an executive level that can actually, I guess, cheer and push on that type of hub type of space, because it definitely needs to have some type of representation to understand what is needed in the community to I guess push the door forward for those type of things, you know. Fian?
Yeah, other than the first one about outreach and kind of going off of what Pimpton was saying, I think it's also like maybe opportunities to partner with representatives in the Black community and encourage their efforts to kind of cultivate these spaces. So for example, like it's interesting for me from Saskatoon seeing the Regina community and seeing the artists there, and that you guys kind of have a collective going on. That's really inspiring. On our end, with BPS, the Black Professionals and Entrepreneurs of Saskatchewan, we've been doing Black History Month events. And that's where myself and a few board members have been like active in producing these shows that have brought artists and dancers. And our AV sound tech team is a Black person, Tag Productions, like basically anyone to do with production, photo, video has been Black people from our community. But what that's created was almost like the first time that like we're all together like that in such a way, and we were putting on this big production that essentially was open to the general public. So it became something not only to share, but also within our community, we have each other's contacts now, we see each other's talents. So I think that since that's efforts that we've already been doing, like a lot of these organizations, they'll probably have to start from scratch, like you're saying, Pimpton, but like if they partnered with people like us who are already like in there, like in the weeds as well, it's a way to help both and like create those conversations. And then we're able to like bring in all these individuals. So if they're like, oh, we need a Black sound person, it's like, oh, I already got that, or video person, I got that, like, because we have those contacts through those relationships already, and people see how qualified they are when they actually see the presentations as well.
Thank you. You're muted, Ian.
And it's actually a great segue, because there's a comment that alludes to, you know, Prince was talking about the need for certain things, and all of you were speaking about those things. But I think infrastructurally, it's critical to understand, and you know, as Rookie, I think that may be Rookie there. that there is an economic aspect of this conversation which is critical to the creation of a hub, like Zoshi was alluding to, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is actually a great moment to segue to, you know, the economics of this conversation. And you know, like understanding that economic discrimination is based on economic factors, right? And so those factors are things like the amount of funding that are available to individuals to create things like a studio or to like start up a management company. You know, research, just general research in business has shown that Black companies bootstrap from less than $20,000, right? And so it's like, you know, let's have a little bit of a conversation about access to capital. We talked about grants and grant funding, you know, but sponsorships and endorsements and venture capital and these kind of things, and how systemic racism, you know, like we're very polite. We have a very, very polite way of having these conversations. And we say, you know, people don't understand things that they don't know, but basically some of the issues that are caused that we're talking about today come from the lack of understanding of the fact that people are people, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, I don't know who said it, but somebody said, you know, like we give the jobs to the same people that we know. We were talking, it was a food analogy. I think it was you, Prince. You know what I mean? Like we eat what we know, et cetera, et cetera. Things can grow if fed. You know what I mean? You might like roti. You might like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, if an opportunity, if you give an opportunity to a soca artist, you actually might realize that you like that music. And so, like, you know, let's have a little bit of a conversation on the steps and the processes that are needed in terms of finance. What is it that you guys need in terms of finance for the creation of spaces for Black artists and on organizations? Are there any organizations? If there are any organizations,
And
that,
are you, oh, sorry to interrupt you again.
go ahead, Click.
And
Go ahead.
are you guys aware of any organizations or spaces or individuals who have tried to find funding to create some sort of hub that you guys are talking about? And if not, that's fine. I'm just curious if there's if you're aware of anybody trying to chase funding to do similar things.
Myself personally, the funding thing is really, so even Prince had discussed like great country artists, and like rightly so, a lot of the Sask budget goes towards. I would also throw in the folk conversation. Like folk is a big part of this as well, but folk music, country music, etc. As far as that funding goes, it is the kind of, it does and has always felt like they feel like that works, so they keep greasing those wheels. They keep putting the money in that sector. But what I have kind of learned from my experience and time in the industry is that it doesn't necessarily take great music or great creations to get your stuff out there. It takes a budget. So the funding conversation always for me sometimes comes pretty early in these discussions, because I am kind of aware that you will meet a brick wall at some point if you don't have the capital to leap over it. And when we're coming from a lot of us being immigrants, I'm not sure what everybody's family socioeconomic status is, but I know that education about economics is something that we don't necessarily have the access to. So there wasn't a parent, or we can say OG, or any person in a position of authority who says, hey, this is how to spend the money. Hey, this is how to recoup the money. This is how to raise the money, et cetera, to be able to do some of these things. When I was speaking about incentives to like provide a job, to have these outreaches, it's even like when I'm saying these things, I'm really saying like, hey, I don't know. I actually have a question, like, how would we need as Black people to be approached to not be offended when certain things like this are being offered? Like, if we opened up the newspaper and it said, hey, looking for Black artists or Black creators, and like, would it need to say like a dollar value that says, hey, this job pays so and so much per, like, come fill this position? Like, what would it actually take for us to step out of that little comfort zone and say, hey, I'm Black, I can help the community, let me go chase that job or opportunity? Obviously, seeing people like Xochi on the SaskMusic board, it's definitely in that same vein. But when we're talking about people who actually distribute the funding, like Creative Sask or what Factor or Sask Arts Board, etc., is there an ability, like what would they or these foundations have to say to actually bring us out of our space to show up and say, hey, let me get that check and start making that revenue and whatever occur from that? Because creating the hub, creating all of these things, it does take either a primary investor, or B, a collective of people with the know-how and resources of how to move the money. But without that information, you kind of will, like, you may throw a few good events, you may do some big things, but cracking that that generational wealth conversation, or that conversation of, okay, this is something that it has residuals and it will continue beyond our efforts and our gigs and shows, etc. It definitely takes, in my mind, a level of education that has not been accessed by most of the Black artists around here. In my opinion, I obviously could be wrong about that, but
Yeah, I wanted to add too, like, I think, like, in terms of finding funding for a specific event, like, most of the funding I have gotten is like, okay, we're doing Black History Month, do you want to fund it? And it's grant writing. And I can't say I haven't had success because it's so specific, right? But I think when you're talking about a hub, like you're saying, Pimpton, it's like a hub is basically like you're going into like the nonprofit territory, you're going into like administration territory. And I think, again, having that first space is very new. Like, I honestly almost think you'd have to get some of these bigger centers that have established something to almost like mentor the organizations in how do you create this out here, because again, it's like another new step. So yeah, I think that's kind of the gap of like, okay, you have to create the hub, you have to create, and then in terms of like saying like we need a Black this or Black that, I know, like, again, with the other organization that I'm on the board of, Black Professionals and Entrepreneurs of Saskatchewan, it's pretty straightforward what we're focused on. And yeah, I think it's not a very Saskatchewan thing to be like, we need a Black this or Black that. I actually find that weird as someone who grew up here. Whereas like if I visit my friends in like bigger city centers, they're very like, it's easy for them to say Black or brown or like in their descriptions of themselves. And it's almost throws me off because of how I grew up here and how I was like one of the only maybe growing up. So I was like, okay, I am the Black person, but people don't want to say that because they don't want you to feel bad either. And so it's like
is there a fear of offending people? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
yeah, like
yeah.
yeah, like in my jazz program, like my prof had to ask the class, can I use the word Black when describing the history of jazz music, which sounds like really funny because obviously that is the huge history of jazz music. But he's like, I don't want to offend anybody. I was the only person of color in that class, so I think we don't want to offend me. But I think there's like some things culturally in Saskatchewan too around how we talk about race as well.
I think this is an important factor. Where is that stemming from? Where is the fear? Is there where does the is it a fear of backlash? Is it a fear of being blacklisted? Is it a fear, like, what is the fear attached to?
You know, I almost, and like, forgive my ignorance, but I almost think it's a fear of like tokenism, if that's even the correct term. We kind of grew up in this era of being the only Black person. Like in bigger city centers like Toronto, Calgary, etc., you can go to schools and grow up in neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. Whereas in Saskatchewan, Regina, this is kind of a new occurrence where these large immigration communities are kind of occupying a neighborhood. Prior to that, it's kind of you're thin and few and far between. You're one of three in a classroom. You jump up and say, black people invented rock and roll. Oh, whoa, like, let's go. You know what I mean? Like, let's have that let's argue with a teacher at the age of 12, 13 years old and get sent to the office for having that kind of an opinion. Like, that's really the climate of Saskatchewan, especially when I was growing up. Maybe changing today, of course, but when I was growing up, it's like you can't just come out and profess how great black power is. Saying things like black power in Saskatchewan is almost like, whoa, are you guys trying to get out of control over here? Like, I feel like that's always been the energy. Like I said, with CJE, my collective, we were moving around. I had crazy lines in some of my songs talking about these kind of like racial or et cetera's. And it's just like, you really, I had a line where I said something to some, I'm just a black man, da 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 da. And it's just like the empowerment of saying that, but also the looks and the confusion and the like. Saskatchewan in particular is a place where they want to say like, black people have it easy here. You know what I mean? Like, that is actually a part of the conversation. It's like, oh no, if anyone has it difficult here, it's Indigenous people. The black people have it easy. Like, black cop. I had a person who was married to a police officer once say this to me while he was working on my vehicle. Oh, da 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 da. Like, you know, the black da 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 da. It's not bad here. Da 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 da. And it's like, well, you know, to have the ability to stand up and say no, like, you guys don't know, like, let me inform you, let me educate you. These are kind of new spaces, especially post George Floyd and all of these movements, the BLM, et cetera. Those are kind of new opportunities that I think we are kind of finding to be able to really stand and say black. Prior to that, it's almost like you had to kind of whisper it and just fit in, you know?
Can I say something? So like, I'm hearing all of that, and it's like, it's kind of sad, and I'm just thinking like the reverse needs to be the case, right? So there needs to be like a representation that actually breeds knowledge to an expansive level. Like, there needs to be action items that are being taken to intentionally include Black artists in a province where Black people are everywhere. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that needs to be something that like, it needs to do a whole 180. You know, we need to start all over again. And right now, I see us as artists and musicians and Black collectives, and whether it be like photographers or even going to a show and seeing the sound engineer as a Black guy, I'm like, that's dope. Like, when we have these spaces, these hub spaces, like, those are the kind of people that can show up and then change the narrative that, oh, okay, like, you know, this is not something that's hidden, because if it was, this is not something that's new, because if it was, these people won't be here. These people have been perfecting their craft up until now, and just need like a chance to like show it off and say, we can add to this community, we can bring the unity that we actually see. Like, I'm somebody that's big on unity. Like, if it's like, I feel like it's not, the skill is not balanced if there's no me and you. So it's like, that needs to be the structure, that needs to be the foundation. And it sucks that it wasn't being laid right when y'all were kids and growing up here. But
Got it. I would say something that just a quick yes or no answer. Is there musical schools? Is there educational spaces in Saskatchewan? Meaning like teaching the music business. Is there a space like that exists there?
I wouldn't say music business as far as I know. I know like at Long McQuaid you can take like classes for
That's what I was going to say. Contemporary.
But
Yeah,
on the business side, something that's basically nurturing the infrastructure that doesn't exist there. And if even if you had to pay for it, that you're not
SaskMusic.
You're not aware.
SaskMusic's the best thing for that. Yeah.
Okay. Just curious, because like obviously sometimes that's you know, it's great that those spaces exist, but sometimes they're not obtainable to the community either because of funding and things of that nature. You know what I mean? And the cost to take them on. Another element I really quickly want to talk about with economics is the what resources are available in terms of export ready? Are you guys like the term export ready means being able to build an artist's career to the point where you can take them to the US or to the UK or to Asia? Like, do you feel that there is opportunities for Black individuals in the market of Saskatchewan, providing those opportunities provided to them, and that you're seeing them getting those opportunities presented to them, or have participated in any of those type of export programs?
I mean,
Okay.
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I know that I see a lot of the grant postings for that specifically. So I would say in terms of, and I will say like genuinely for SaskMusic, they're always posting different things in their newsletters. So I will say like, there's like things posted in terms of opportunities. I've noticed a lot of Black artists who have just kind of taken it upon themselves as well, in the independent stream, been really active on this on social media and getting a lot of, you know, streams through Spotify just through their own efforts. It's almost like a bootstrapping in the music situation. Like I'm seeing a lot of that through Black artists. Like they'll just almost like work hard on their own to try and figure it out if it's not directly presented to them. Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a very, very direct question. So we've spoken to the, financial literacy and the lack thereof by members of the Black community and the need for education. So I'm gonna ask a very, very pointed question. Are funds needed specifically to support the development of knowledge and economic learning and learning capital and basically incubation and acceleration programs for the understanding of economics, for the understanding of grant systems, for the understanding of business development, writing business plans, et cetera, et cetera?
Most definitely. Yeah, I think most artists are still in that artistic phase. So I think the education of the music business, and I mean, like obviously most artists know you can make money in music, but like it's they still need to be to be explained that it's really attainable and you got to start little. It's not it's not when you sign the big contract and you're on billboards. There is people you can still make a living off being an artist, without being the biggest artist in the world. So yeah, I think we definitely need funding for that.
And I think part two of that question is what role could that investment play in the community, right? In creating an entire generation of Black music practitioners, not just artists, but is there education to understand publishing, to understand that there are jobs as legal or music supervisors or other areas of the industry? And how could those, because I want the organizations to hear how these kind of funds could change the infrastructure of Saskatchewan and its music industry for Black music.
I could suggest that access to funding would allow people such as yourselves, Click and Ian, to essentially either come over to Saskatchewan to run workshops that are 2 months long or 3 months long, or even just have the time to create an itinerary or a program or a curriculum that you can then bring over here and teach to whoever individuals that are able to sign up, and then even have a follow-up a following year to come. Everything's going according to plan. Like you guys, I'm not sure if you're in Toronto, Ian, are you as well? Yeah, you guys have the Remix project out there. So I'm friends with Rich Kid, and I like probably in 2010 I think I met him, but the Remix project was running and I have been kind of like just keeping my eye on that since. And like that is the kind of structure that I think, like just on the minimum level, could help artists in Saskatchewan like come to this place, because we're the same age. There's not a gap in like a capacity. It's simply a gap in awareness and accessibility and the people with the knowledge who are present to teach. Like you guys, sorry to say you guys, but I know David is involved with the Remix project, pumping out incredible artists all the time. all the time artists are coming out of these programs. So it just goes to show that just a little bit of funding, and I'm not sure if that is a non-for-profit or a volunteer. I kind of think there was a volunteer aspect of it, but the size of it makes me believe there's funding involved. But ultimately, that model, it's like a franchise in my eyes. It's like McDonald's. I think that model could be repeated anywhere that Black artists or any people of color operate and will thrive.
Yeah. I wanted to, oh, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to add to that. I totally agree. I think there's an opportunity to, because I think a lot of these organizations, like keeping in mind, like we are in a smaller center. So I think some of these organizations are trying to bring in as much as they humanly can, but there's going to be a huge difference between Saskatchewan and like a media center like Toronto. And so what I noticed I benefited from was when there was like countrywide funding for the Black community, and where there was a mandate from these bigger centers that they had to then work with some of these smaller centers over Zoom and be able to teach some of these courses and teach some of these resources from a business standpoint, which is what the other nonprofit I'm on the board of benefited from. So we had people calling in from Toronto and Maritimes and all over who had way more access to resources. So I think what I would suggest is even something like a cohort where maybe some of these major centers have something like that. And through the organizations we have in our provinces, we can tap into that and get that access to learn, where it goes through all these kind of like publishing, like all those things that, you know, artists need to be set up well. Just knowing that access is an issue just for distance in general, even for the music industry out here in general, let alone Black artists.
So before we come off of economics, I'm going to reverse that question out. What could resources to artists and music professionals in Saskatchewan in terms of budgets within grants to seek outside mentorship, to seek travel expenses, which allow you to go Pimpton, to come out to Toronto, to interact with Rich Kid and others such as himself? To, again, to your point about the Remix project, for the creation of, maybe it's a music office, maybe it is just a small office, right? The creation of a program or a space that receives core funding for the creation of these kind of programs.
Or sponsors an individual. Like that's another concept, is like, okay, hey, you know, you run a program every year where you pick an individual from within Saskatchewan that is basically, you know, we talked about me asking the question about export to other countries. Maybe it's exporting to other cities. So, you know what I mean? To learn the fundamentals and to build their network and their net worth.
I think that could create like a domino effect for sure. Like having one artist, one person participate in a program that's like upbuilding and very knowledgeable with regards to the business side of things as well. And then having them go back and share their experience and also suggesting the same thing to peers. Like that's definitely something that is definitely gonna just spill out over the next years and like create more of like instead of just like an artist that's stuck in an artist phase, more of like a knowledgeable artist, an artist that knows how to pass the baton to their fellow artists and say, hey, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to do it. This is who you need to go to understand why you need to do it. So yeah, I think definitely like an outreach like that is definitely gonna change the game.
It's interesting because our last conversation, last roundtable we had with Alberta Music is very similar to this conversation, but this is the first time I've ever heard this idea of like, you know, bringing somewhere else. But like, you know, there might be an idea of, you know, collaborating with multiple provinces. It's like SoCan has a SoCan house in Nashville, has a SoCan house in LA. Like imagine if there was something where all these organizations came together to basically you know, create space in major hubs like Toronto, for example, to come here to get into the market and to build knowledge and information, you know. That's a new idea.
Feel like it could even spill out to like, yeah, like export missions where like Saskatchewan Black artists go over there. Like it could even be the reverse, can be the case where we even start to have other like smaller cities as well bring their artists over here to say, hey, we have pioneered this thing and we've built this thing and we're here to share the experience with you and also help you build it as well for your own community. Like I think it's kind of like bringing the world together, if you ask me, but in a Black way. So yeah, that's really cool.
I definitely support the idea of like having artists go to other cities, because I mean we do have artists that come here and perform, but it's nice to it's a nice way to inspire the upcoming artists here and also teach us, how the scene is there, learn about the infrastructure, and then we can come here and establish that there. So I think that's a big one, really.
Yeah. With lack of time, I don't want to spend tons and tons of space here. But I just want to identify media. And what does media look like for you guys in Saskatchewan? Like, is there a space for Black artists to be heard on the radio? Do you feel like the television and newspapers pay attention to the Black artists? And do you know of any professionals that are working in that space?
I would like to touch on that for a bit. I do think that we have progressed as a province, as a city, with regards to putting Black music on the radio. My issue with the thing is more so like within the Black community for this particular conversation here in Saskatchewan. It's like we have tons of like Black artists in Saskatchewan, right? In Regina, in Saskatoon, Prince Albert, wherever, and also very diverse as well that represent different walks of life. What I would like to see change is, especially with radio, I don't know what body like regulates that, but it's like if you're gonna have a Black radio station in Saskatchewan, let at least 70-80% of the music be like Saskatchewan artists, Black Saskatchewan artists. And instead of like people like they're Black, it's a Black
that thing you just said is a hard thing to do, period, where you are in this country, just because of the nature of radio and radio. It looks like, I don't want to spend too much time politicking on all that, that specifically, but I just want to I would like to hear if you guys just acknowledge what is happening with media. If you could just be very blunt to the point, let me know if what exists there. That's what I would like to hear first and foremost. What exists in terms of media from your perspective for Black people in media? What exists?
Yeah. Okay. I think I'll go off of Sochi's point too, and forgive my ignorance, the rest of the artists can like jump in. But when I think of like the radio stations in my city, it's like we got Rock 102, we got C95, which plays pop music, we got like the news talk radio, we got Magic Cool that plays like old school songs. So when they are playing Black music, it's going to be the mainstream artists we all know for sure. And when I think of a space where local Black music's being played, it would kind of be like what you'd call like college radio stations, which I think, I mean, from my experience with the one in my city, they've always been pretty open to like, you can come in, do an interview, you can send in your song. But as far as like Black play, like in the radio media like that, like most of our radio stations, I can't think of many that do a ton with like local artists, unless that artist has really elevated themselves to get that level of radio play. But I could be completely ignorant on the matter. I'd love to hear what others have to say on that.
I think
I definitely agree
sorry.
there. I think in
Sorry, go ahead.
Regina, we do have Melodina just got a show recently on our local radio station, which in my opinion, is a big step forward. Do I know what kind of programming? I believe she does play a large amount of Black artists. I don't believe there are local artists to the most point, but she does incorporate. I know she's played Xochi before, so I know she does incorporate. But honestly, I think there's like one. If we're talking about media and we're talking about like radio, then there's one Black person on the radio that I am aware of that talks about Blackness and promotes and welcomes and opens her show to Blackness. I think her show is called Rhythm and Vibes. There's social media is the only other media. Like there's no news. There's no news programming for, oh, here's our section on what's happening in Black art. There's nothing like that in the Leader, Post, or Star Phoenix. There are no individuals who are assigned the detail or duty of not marketing, sorry, of reporting on Black art. That does not exist to my knowledge.
And so what is the impact on misrepresentation, representation? You have a show, can you get coverage?
Honestly,
what role does that play in the stereotyping of Black music, of Black artists, of Black audiences? And what is the impact then on economics, on, again, back to representation?
yeah. I think honestly 100% it is the impact is that we have to essentially get in where we fit in. So if you want to ask us when Black people have a day of media, well, it's Black History Month. Like if we're being honest, that's when they're reaching out and saying, hey, Black artists, what do you have to say? Black History Month, February. That's it. Aside from that, no one is actually reaching out for our opinions like we have just heard. We have to be kind of reaching a caliber where we're barking up and we're making enough noise, ringing the phone, making the phone ring, whatever, for them to be like, oh, okay, let's pay attention to this person briefly and then give them their little moment and then keep it moving. And now we've been inclusive and we keep it moving. And that's how I feel. And I'm sorry, a lot of times opinions feel or sound a little like jaded.
But I also imagine that's probably challenging for people in Saskatchewan based on the fact that we've talked about fear of having to push your Blackness. So like, I could see how that might be a little challenge when trying to get in front of people's doors. But I will say something today, as I was contacted by a lady a Black lady who writes for CBC, just recently joined. And I said to her, I said, thank you so much. And I wasn't sure if she was Black, but as soon as our conversation was done, I asked her, I said, you know, what's your background? She said, oh, I'm Black. I'm like, So it made me think like right away, I wonder if she wasn't like, if she wasn't Black, would somebody have reached out? Like she reached out to do the story because it appealed to her because she saw herself in the space. She saw that this is a great story that needs to be brought to the limelight. And that to me is an example of what it has to be across the board. Like if there's a show going on, like we're battling with a representation, seeing ourselves and not having people in those spaces that see us and want us to shine. But it's also like, you know, it's not necessarily about just for ourselves. Don't get it twisted. All the music that we're doing is consumed by white people and other people and other cultures.
Oh man,
so it's not like we're talking about this narrative strictly for ourselves. The narrative is what is popular.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that there needs to be a conversation when we talk, not to go back to economics, but like if you want to grow something and make more money in the market, realize what is the selling thing at the moment in time and support that as well, you know?
That is kind of, when I said get in where you fit in, that is kind of what I meant. Kind of suggesting that an artist like myself, I make hip hop, I make rap. Well, if I make a rap song about the Rough Riders, they're gonna play it. Okay, if I make some song about the wheat in the fields and the, you know, like the Old Town Road, the Old Town Road idea. If one of us artists makes a song catering to this, of course they're like, oh, we've got Black people. Come on, like come see our Black people, you know. But this is kind of what when I say get in where you fit in, it kind of like business wise, yes, you must market, you must cater, you must provide to what's being consumed. But artistically and just creatively, it does make you have to kind of somewhat change your direction to suit the needs of the Saskatchewan budget ultimately.
Right.
Like, you know, gotcha. You're competing with these folk songs all the time.
Prince, I would like to jump into, I think we've identified a little bit about the media and stuff, and I if you would like to add to that, it'd be great. But I also love to just ask you a couple questions in regards to the live space as well, and just like maybe you
Right.
could share not just a little tiny bit of whatever anecdotes you want to add to the media, fine. But I also like to hear your perspective on being a manager, representing artists, how easy it is for you to get your artists on stages in Saskatchewan, and what that looks like, and are you taken seriously and things of that nature,
Yeah, I mean, in terms of media, we definitely need more. I don't think there's any dedicated outlet towards like Black art. I know CBC has and SaskMusic obviously have been definitely open to showcasing, but there's still like a lot more growth needed there. In terms of live performances, it's not easy. I mean, um, I've been blessed to know a few people who've personally made events, even Pimpton himself, and and that's easy when you can just communicate and say, hey, I'm an artist, so I know you, what's up. But I mean, for the big events, it's hard, and I mean, I've had a few successes, more losses in that terms. And yeah, it's definitely very tough. It's definitely still if you know the right person type of thing. Um, I really think for the artists who are trying, especially because it's one thing to make music, it's another thing to actually take your time and put in the hard work and make the videos and just try to compete with what's out there nowadays. And I think it's really unfortunate when artists who I mean, at this point most artists do not make money off their music, and if they do, it's not paying the bills, and most times you have to invest from your jobs and all that to create videos and all that. So it's really unfortunate when you go through all that stress and then you try to be heard, or you try to talk to an events manager and say, I have some songs and this and that, and if you're not named on the list, or you're not being co-signed by somebody, it's tough. So yeah, there's really a lot of growth that needs to be done there, and more opportunities for artists to be able to perform on the platforms that we have, and especially when they invite big artists from the States and all that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you should have at least one, two, or three Black artists on there kind of represented, but unfortunately it's not the case. So yeah.
So I have a little bit of a follow-up question, and Prince, I think this is actually
Yes.
down your alley. And I'm not sure who alluded to it before, but we know as an organization that the priority in Canada, not just Saskatchewan,
Right.
wise and otherwise, has historically gone to pop, rock, alt, and folk music, right? And I know that country and folk are primarily the focus out there. And so I have a two-part question. One with respect to the Black artists that are in, and I use the term unconventionally Black music genres because, country, there are Black people in country, there are Black people in blues, it's our music. There are Black people in these different spaces. But I want to ask you about these, like, you guys have tons of festivals, Winterruption and Midwinter Blues and Saskatoon Blues. And, like, you guys have all of these Moose Jaw band and choral. Like, what is your experience with your own like in your own space and with others that in getting into these kind of music festivals across the Jazz Fest Regina and like these kind of spaces?
I mean, personally,
You
I've
guys can
tried.
all answer. You guys can all step in and
Yeah.
answer.
Personally, not much success. That's just a personal thing. I can't really speak for the other artists, but yeah, not much success in those genres.
Mhm. And what do you attribute that to? Do you think that that comes from a lack of understanding of the genres that you produce? Do you think that that comes from stereotyping? Like, do you think that Black music genres are generally considered a part, like we alluded to this earlier, a part of the cultural tapestry of Saskatchewan?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with just lack of representation, also miseducation. I mean, a lot of people they might be thinking, well, if I get Black people, what type of crowd am I going to bring? Are there Black people who appreciate this type of music? So I mean, it's some people still don't understand, like the world is a global village, and people like different type of music. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. And also, I mean, a lot of the events I've tried to, get my artists in, it's, there's an email, send an email with your work, a body of work or a link, and we'll get back to you. And you do that and you don't hear anything back. So it's really kind of hard to say, how it is on the other end. A few times I have spoken to a few people in person. Some people have ghosted me, never coming back, and all type of responses. So yeah.
So, it's funny, like, and I'm not going to harp on this, but I think, like, you just reminded me of something I said like 3 years ago. I was like, the silence is actually violence. Like, it is so disheartening for anyone who is watching, for any artist of any genre or any race or whatever, to reach out and put out the effort to make contact with an organization or a festival, etc., and to not receive any sort of response. And that goes for granting as well. Like, to not know why you were unsuccessful, etc. But I think that that's a very, very valid and important point to get across today. Can any, sorry, go ahead, Click.
I was going to ask if anybody else wanted to add to just the question in regards to the live space. Do you see Black artists from Saskatchewan represented in the live music space? And what barriers are they facing from getting booked in venues and festivals?
I was gonna say though, like this year at the CVAF, I was impressed on one of the specific things that they did at one of the venues was actually like put on like on the block type hip hop centered live show. I'm not sure if they've done that before, but to me that was something that I felt they were trying to include the culture and stuff like that. I had one of my friends, Rezi, she makes really dope music as well. She's a singer songwriter. I kind of just asked her to be on that as well. So I would say stuff like that really does warm my heart. Like I wouldn't say I've had those like specific like Black hip hop, or let's highlight the culture in that sense. But this year it was interesting to see, and I hope that can like continue. Yeah, like with regards to other shows, like Pimpton was saying, the Black History Month. Again, that happened 2022 and 2023, like giving Black people the voice to tell their stories and stuff and kind of hear their perspective on things. But yeah, live music shows, it definitely can be a little bit more inclusive, like definitely more also, I would say with regards to promotion, like social media promotion, to actually like make it intentional to say we want to have like we're looking for Black artists to be in these spaces, not just one or two, like at least 3-4 Black artists here. So
I saw a comment in the there's a comment in the chat, and just from Sonia Reed, who I want to give a big shout out to as well. But she's felt like there isn't an audience for music outside of country and rock. Based on my research, speaking to a lot of people there is a club scene that plays hip hop and R&B. There are radio stations that play hip hop and R&B. Yes, rock and country exist there, but it sounds like there's other genres that are listened to and accepted there, and there are concerts that come through there. I know artists like Smiley just was out there. I know there is many artists that come through the market, so there has to be a market for it. The question is, are you seeing Black Saskatchewan artists support those shows and on those shows? And if not, why?
Yeah, so to speak on that, I am fairly, as far as even just the hip hop and some of the R&B, like I through the Roy Woods show in 2020 or 2019 when he came to Saskatoon, that was a sold out show. Like there are many people, not only Black, that pay money to come see Black art everywhere. Once again, I take it back to, and I'm not going to harp on economics, but take it back to the funding and the fact that Saskatchewan's primary goal just seems to be to invest money in these areas that show the return constantly. And that's it. It's not that we don't have the audience necessarily. It's just that we don't have the people throwing up the money to put up the big stage to fill that lot, fill that parking lot, fill that stage space with attendees. And that's it. And it's simply just by design, in my opinion. It's a choice that they're like, okay, we're throwing, say if Folk Fest is coming up or Summer Invasion is no longer a thing, but Shake the Lake, et cetera, they are looking like the people who are the Ralco radios, the people who are funding these events, if they're getting government money, I'm not sure, but whoever is funding these events, they know what they like. And that is kind of, in my opinion, what kind of drives who they decide to assign to book artists. Like they're picking their niece, they're picking their nephew, they're picking whoever they've worked with in the past, and they're saying, hey, book these artists, get this, here's the budget, book the thing. They're not saying, hey, let's book an inclusive multicultural show, you know. And since that's nowhere near part of the agenda, it could never be part of the result. It's not just going to be by default that we have Black artists here. It's like, well, they're not putting money in Black artists' pockets. They're not saying, hey, let me cut you a check to come perform. So the audience cannot develop to even know they need to be anywhere. They're not putting the billboard that says, hey, here comes a bunch of Black artists, and put a big picture of Black artists on the overpass. It's like, or whatever, the billboards above the underbridge or whatever. It's like, this is not happening. They're putting the picture of the country artist, they're putting the picture of the folk artist, they're putting a picture of the banjo, and they're saying, hey, we're gonna make some money. And that kind of just seems to be the trend every single time, in my opinion. I've played Summer Invasion, I've played some, Xochi mentioned the Cathedral Village Arts Festival. I've been playing that since 2009 or something. A lot of times in a band with so multicultural band, whatever, but a lot of times just a rap hip hop event that we used to showcase ourselves in our own section. We were not funded. It was 100% volunteer, but we always engaged a crowd of over 150 to 200, 300 people just in this one area every single year for 10, however many years, over 10 years. But they were not at the same time. I believe Xochi played main stage this year, but I would still, if I needed to do a submission, I didn't necessarily keep doing submissions simply because I knew I already had a space that I carved out for myself. But had I been like, hey, can I play main stage? Oh, maybe next year. Oh, maybe next year. You know, try again next year. And that has been the pattern, to the point that I was like, I'll just carve my own space. So as far as talking about pioneering and maybe why sometimes we become reluctant to even apply to things like Folk Fest, et cetera, it's because we can already look in these people's face, in their eyes, the promoters, the people creating or hosting the events, and understand that these are Saskatchewan people trying to book these Saskatchewan events that we have always been privy to the exact same event year by year. When there's a multicultural aspect, it is essentially kind of harped on that there's a multicultural, almost exploited in a sense. It is not just a part of inclusion and what's normal and natural. It is literally a commodity, you know? So yeah, I don't know. It does create barriers. It does create reasons that we would want to say, hey, maybe we won't even bother trying. Some people do keep trying. Some people keep pressing, and all power to us and them. But that has been generally my experience, is that where the money is being allocated is not in the hands of Black artists. Therefore, Black artists kind of slowly become more and more reluctant to even bother attempting to submit for certain events. Great Escape in Germany is one of these kinds of things. And when we were talking about artists potentially linking up province to province, it's like we need a collective, just like Canada House, or if it's SOCAN who has Canada House at these like South by Southwest, A3C, these kinds of events. We need like a Saskatchewan Black House, like whatever we want to call it. But we need those kinds of festivals and things to be opening up a space for us to recruit and hire and pay and etc. A team that includes AV, includes publicists, and if every single year we need to recruit and train more of these people to send them and place them at each one of these events annually, we need the funding for that. Like those are the things I think can really drive us.
Those are all. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I wanted to add to that though, like just in line with what Pimpton was saying. I like for the club scene, like look at me, I even forgot about that. Like literally most of the most popping clubs in Regina are literally Black run. Like if there was like promoters bring artists from outside all the time. I don't know if there's a funding for that, or if there's even like a where it can be something that's more professional to say, okay, you want to bring this artist, this big hip hop artist from Nigeria or wherever, like who are the Black Saskatchewan artists in the city that you're gonna have there? How can we fund it so they can get paid and they're not just going to perform for free? And like, you know, stuff like that. Like the Black scene, it's almost like there's a seclusion now that I actually like think about it for real. It's like there's the side of the city that's putting on the festivals where there's a lot of money going in there, but it's like we pick just a very small few and throw them in there. And then there's the other side of the city where it's like 100% Black, like literally it's packed to the brim, you know, but there's no like trying to figure out, oh, how can we actually sponsor this? How can we like make this?
Can I ask Ian to step in here? And I wish we were able to have like way more people involved in this conversation. I spoke with a couple great promoters that I thought, you know, one of the things I learned from them is at the end of the day, and Ian can talk about this, is like, you know, they're bringing in international, like I talked to a bunch of people that are doing a lot of Afro beats and bringing international artists from Nigeria to perform in Saskatchewan. Happens a lot, like almost monthly. I find that happens in Saskatchewan, and I asked if they ever book local acts, and they said no. And a lot of that was mainly because the person who's drawing is the international artist, and so for them, like, their priority is not necessarily an opening act. So my question is, and maybe this is for all of you, and Ian, you could add to this too, is like, what incentive could be put in place to help local artists get an opportunity in those spaces that exist that could help grow and nurture talent?
I would almost say media coverage, honestly. Xochi is speaking on places like Calabrash and Vibes as far as those nightclubs. I've been to some of those parties. It's like 500 people in there. It's like 500 people at the after party, right? Like, I really think if artists or if these promoters were aware or had some kind of in with the CBCs or the CTVs or the whoever saying, hey, we're going to give you guys media coverage. We hear you also have some local artists you can put on. We want to make a cross collaboration. Let's promote your show on our radio station. Let's put a bill. Let's fund you a billboard. Let's do something. But there definitely has to be some incentive.
I'm going to interrupt you because the problem is we just talked about media. We just talked about the lack of representation. All of you say you didn't know anybody in those spaces. Right. So how does media contribute to this conversation of giving an opportunity to somebody? What incentive can you give a promoter?
Yeah.
What incentive can happen to actually nurture local talent? I have some ideas, but I don't want to say it. I'm going to let you all.
Yeah.
I mean, if it goes to...
That's like what I was thinking. Like, I think there needs to be, because like to the conversations before, like there needs to be some sort of music expansion plan. I actually think if I was on the other side of this, like if I wasn't Black, but I was looking at what is trending on the radio with Afrobeat, with the rap music, that's a market expansion opportunity. So even if you're just purely in it for the money and you didn't care about the community, I'd be thinking, how can I capitalize on this? Okay, we don't know these people yet, but hey, these people are bringing in people every month. Hey, maybe we can partner with them, incentivize them to feature a local act and expand our Saskatchewan music economy. So, I mean, there's that business aspect as well, but I think the part of not being engaged in like the main scene, even though something's worked for the province for so long, if they aren't aware of the trends, I think they'll actually be behind on what they can have for opportunities in growing musically economy, because it's going to happen everywhere else. Like, I know, again, back to the Nigerian parties, they spend thousands just to fly in artists just for the party for like one weekend. Like, there are people who have money to spend. So it's just, again, not knowing what's happening in some of these spaces. Afrobeat artists, like, they're selling out shows in Alberta, definitely. Like, we've seen that. So it's not like money and numbers is like what people need. And once they see that it's there, I think they should want to be part of that investment. And it's furthering the community. So yeah, those conversations definitely need to happen.
I definitely agree with her. I also think there's a big gap between like like the artists creating the music and the people hearing. As you said, there are a lot of clubs owned by Black people and all that, but why aren't we hearing a lot more local musicians being played, right? And I mean, there's a pending job on the DJs, because the DJs kind of propagate this music. A lot of people don't know till they know. They don't know till they hear, oh, who's that? Who's this? And then they Google or Shazam it or whatever. So there needs to be that bridge between the music, nightlife, local artists being played. And I mean, what the government could do is also partner with promoters. If promoters were able to book these artists across in Nigeria or wherever in the States, whatever, if you have something legit, they should be able to say, hey, we'll go in, 30% or half, or we'll pay for the venue, or just a way to kind of come halfway so the promoters are, kind of see that incentive. Okay, fine. And it all trickles down, right? Promoter gets the event, artist comes, local artists are able to showcase their talent. Also, hopefully be able to, have a sit down with artists, maybe just get some advice. Hey, this is, I'm a big artist from this, whatever, this is what you guys can do. And I mean, that goes along with just inspiring, upcoming artists and stuff. So yeah.
Prince, thank you. That was exactly what I was thinking, is that art spaces or funding bodies could actually be funding promoters, like you're saying,
Right.
if the eligibility is that they had a Canadian act, like a Saskatchewan act on the bill. And you could also incentivize them by saying, hey, can you also have like that artist, the international artist that you're bringing in, come and do a workshop with these artists. Like there's ways of embodying and nurturing a community by supporting the community in a specific way. You know what I mean?
Right.
Sochi, do you want to add to that real quick?
Yeah, I was just thinking right now, like, man, I love that this particular conversation, because for me it's also like an eye opener, like just being lost in the sauce for so long and not seeing like how that gap can actually be like there could be a bridge there. It's all in the collaboration, like with the club owners and the promoters as well, because they're actually very willing. And sometimes I get lost in my own like headspace of like the artist side of things, and I don't think about it like, oh, with the business side, or like this is how this can work. So even like, man, like collaboration for sure, and outreach, like so that we can also get our minds programmed to be thinking on both sides too, so that the scales are balanced as well. But yeah, it's only in the collaboration, like the Saskatchewan music industry needs to collaborate with the Black club owners here. Like whenever there's a show that somebody wants to put on, like let it be like a big deal, and let there be like artists from the city as well that are being promoted for that, so that even those international acts that are coming here, it leaves like a blueprint in their mind, like, oh, okay, this city actually supports their music here, like they care about the music here. And so like this is somewhere that I want to be, because it would spill over at the end of the day, like when you make like the local artists like feel seen and welcomed wherever there's a show, that kind of energy transcends as well with like international artists as well, like they want to go back and tell the story. So yeah,
we're coming close to the end here, and I'd love to even speak longer on a lot of these subjects, but I want to be precious, mindful of everybody's time and whatnot. But going in, like the last little section of today is really talking about succession and retention, which is really, how do we've heard tonight that there's already a lack of infrastructure and a lack of people in spaces. So how can you actually succeed somebody who's not even in a space yet, right? But maybe you can share some ideas and solutions right now, ideas to focus on the mentorships in different ways from different job positions, from being an accountant, a lawyer, label owner, studio owner. These are all areas of the industry that make the industry turn. I'd love to hear from you guys just on some ideas of what could be done or what you would like to see done that would help nurture these type of roles that are needed in Saskatchewan specifically.
So as a manager and producer, and also I've been working closely for years with the studio owner, the owner of Blue Door.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been really monumental. I would say almost every artist that lives in Regina has probably visited there once. I'd say funding to keep the studio spaces open, You know, obviously I know a lot of people have their personal studios and all, but it's also nice to have a professional studio where you can actually come and feel the vibe. I would say training for producers. I've met a lot of young people who, you know, make beats in their houses and all that, and they'll, you know, approach me and say, "Hey, can I get some training?" And when I have the time, I, you know, try to put them through. But adequate training for producers, and yeah, and then funding for studio time for artists, you know, grassroots artists, you know, and because a lot of times writing the grants without professionals, it's kind of tough. It's, you know, it's for someone who just wants to make music and record music and all that. It's a different whole world trying to get into grants. So yeah.
I would jump in and say perhaps things like some version or variety of an internship. So something where perhaps Black individuals are invited to just sit in the meetings and audit, just sit and listen and understand how some of these business meetings and events transpire, and how they even are incepted, how they're conceived, just to be around and be in the room, so we're not always on the reactive or receiving end. But if there's a way to just have us be invited, or even if we take it amongst ourselves to start writing these letters and say, hey, we want to come and sit in this meeting and just like learn and have the ability to take this information and move it on and make something of it, as opposed to always having to come and kind of, you know, have that, like, in order for us to become that person, we essentially need to sit and shadow that person, right? And if that person isn't Black yet, well, then we need to be the first ones, but we need to be in the room where those decisions are still being made, so that we can start to understand and take this information back to the community in a palatable or digestible way. Because I think that's also a lot of it, is the baseline communication. And you know, we hear these things, we hear about whatever, when it comes to royalties and securing movie placements and all film placements for songs and all of these kinds of things. But a lot of times it's jargon, it's spoken in a way that we don't necessarily understand yet. And the only way to understand is to kind of be around the people who are using these terms constantly, who are really speaking in this language.
So maybe I can dovetail off of that. So and maybe just ask this last question, or not last question necessarily, but you know, we've heard some names like throughout our research, and actually, ironically, I think Sandra, who's in the chat, may have been one of them. We've heard Kirk Dal and Nick from Fly Entertainment and Rookie. Maybe you guys can speak specifically on the role that Black and racialized people make in these spaces, as by taking up space and making space, but also to the role of allyship. And I'm not somebody who's a fan of the term, but individuals who are in positions, you know, someone just, I think you just said, you know, maybe some of these individuals are not Black, but the role that a white woman can play in mentorship for a Black woman, the role that somebody in an organization or somebody in a lighting company can play in mentorship. I noticed that there was somebody from a union here. We've discovered that Black representation in union is very, very low, and that is a direct result of the processes by which you get into a union and the apprenticeship processes, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe you guys can speak to the role that mentorship plays in the creation of the next generation of Black music professionals, and stopping our Black music professionals from hitting a glass ceiling, leaving the industry, or leaving your province.
I think mentorship is really important, but there's also a need for there to be understanding from whoever is giving the mentorship. There has to be a mutual respect and mutual understanding of, obviously, I'm one to always learn, and there's always much to learn, especially from people who have experience in it. But you also have to understand, at least have a basic understanding of Black music and the trends and where things at, right? So, but I think it's really, really important, for sure.
I mean, SaskMusic does have like a cool mentorship program. Like, there's a whole lot of like people on there. Like Walter is on there. Like, he does like mixing and mastering stuff as well. There's like lawyers on there if you needed help to like understand like the legal side of things. And yeah, like mentorship for me, like I've been taking part in that mentorship program. Like it's been very knowledgeable, and I can definitely recommend that to every artist. Is like if you're like me and you've just been making music and being vibing, and you actually want to see yourself like, you know, get your feet in the water, understand what's actually happening around you. Like I would say, find someone on there. We have like there's a ton of even marketing professionals, like everything you need. And I don't think it's more in this situation. I don't think it's a black thing now. It's more of like you want somebody that knows what they're doing. You know, at the end of the day, like as a musician too, it's like you want to be mentored by somebody who can show you the ropes. And we can agree, like a lot of people in the music industry, they are very much willing to help. And so I'm not sure how we can promote this to like the black artists that are out there and haven't heard about this mentorship program. Maybe something we need to put out there more, maybe run an ad for it. You know, even non-black artists do need to see that this is a thing, because I think that's actually the first step for any musician and any artist that wants to actually see themselves like make music professionally. It's like get you a mentor. Yeah.
One last thing that I also would like to ask you guys quickly, because we're just going to close. I might go to a couple questions there in the Q&A, and then we'll close. But from speaking to a lot of people, there's not a lot of older individuals who are trying to get in the space. The question is like, what about the younger generation? Because they're going to be the future. The children are the future. So, you know, what things would you advise, solutions that would help maybe engage young people on the roles that exist, and how do you get to them?
I'll say go to schools, like go to high schools, and I think Sax Music already does something like that, where they go and like introduce like music to the younger generation. But specifically speaking about like Black arts, I would say let there be like a representation of Black music in these schools when we go out and have these seminars, if I can call them that, and kind of educate them and let them know that if they do decide to pursue music, like there's a space for them here in Saskatchewan music industry. Um, there's 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 I don't know, there's professionals ready and willing to help them. There's the tools and resources, and they don't need to shy away from that and think that, oh, we're not a huge percentage of the music population, so we maybe might not be accepted as much as the next person. But yeah, when it comes to the next generation, I would definitely say like there needs to be more education about the Saskatchewan music industry, and also let there be that diversity as well, yeah, at these schools, so that the children can know that they have the opportunity to reach out whenever if they want to, and they're gonna get the help that they need.
I think I agree with her with going to high school and educated. But I also think, you know, the younger generations start to see the artists of nowadays flourishing. You know what I mean? Like what happened to back in the day where you have an artist where in your city you're like, oh man, I seen him blow up, and if he can do it, I can do it. Right. So apart from educating, they need to see the progression of artists here, you know, from hey, I knew he could rap, to I heard his song on the radio, to I seen his video on this, to I see him collabing with this artist. And that progression is just becomes the, you know, the fuel that they need in their high school. When I'm done, I want to go do what he's doing, or I want to be like, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like comes around in a full circle from educating them, but then they need to see the possibility. Because if they're like, well, why isn't there an artist who has made it here? Then it's like, you know what I mean? So yeah.
I agree with Prince, and I almost it kind of feels like the chicken or the egg conversation to me, because I'm always going to harp on it. Funding. Like, I think the incentive has to be there. How do youth look up to the past generations? It's through the idea of success. And a lot of times that idea of success is wrapped around being able to be a provider. You want to be an artist, but you have the stigma or the idea that being a Black artist doesn't pay. Well, even the outreach programs, how do you become someone who recruits? Like, does it pay? Like, all of these things have to have some financial incentive, not have to, but ought to have some financial incentive, because it will drive people to understand, especially Black young people, that this is a lifestyle that can be sustained. It doesn't have to be this in and out hobby. It doesn't have to be, oh, you have to go to LA or Toronto or Vancouver to make it. They need to see representation of people who are successful. And by successful, I simply mean able to eat off of their creations and their Black art. And they need to have these representations in their face, in the school showing up, in the church showing up, wherever Black youth are congregating or gathering, showing up to say, hey, like, you can do it too. It's the NBA convo, it's the NFL convo. You don't want to just be a football player because you're fast. You want to be it because you think you can one day buy your mom a house, et cetera, right? So like it's about us being able to be Black and thriving for being Black. That's it. Not having to wishy-washy and be this or that. It's just like, we're Black, we're paid to do what we are and exist as we are, and the youth should be able to aspire to do the same. And I think, personally, I think finances and the dollar incentive will always help drive that home, unfortunately, but truthfully.
Ian?
No, I think those are all critical points. Sorry, alluded to it earlier. I think that economics is key. We never got to speak about race-based data, but like, in knowing what different individuals are getting versus what their peers are getting, et cetera, we'll be able to gain a better understanding of how it is that the artists are doing in the market. I really wanted to make a super quick point with respect to something Xochitl said. Advertising to community in spaces that communities frequent, whether it be through ambassadorship or through Black media, whether that Black media be social media or print media or TV media or whatever the case may be, in spaces that we frequent. And if you don't know where to find it, you need to find someone Black, to Pimpton's point, and pay them like you would pay somebody to find women or whichever else. And so, we're at the end of the roundtable, but I want to throw to each of the speakers, and I want to ask you a very, very specific question. And that question is, what is your single biggest issue that you've faced as a Black music professional in the specific space which you operate and exist in, as an artist or an organization or a creative or whatever, and your solution? And I want it to be very, very pointed. Xochitl, I know that as an Afro soul artist, as a Black queer artist, like, you face very, very specific issues. I would like you to speak to what the biggest issue that you have faced is and what your solution is to that.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's more so not feeling like when I go to play shows, it's almost like it's not a lot of people that look like me there unless they're like my friends, Also, it's almost as if, like, for example, I mentioned seclusion. It's like, I want to be able to play a show that's like predominantly Black, but also have the congregation of the other races there, the white races, the Asian races there as well. And that would be only attainable through collaboration with the chieftains in the Black entertainment industry in Regina that are very far off from like the pyramid of the Saskatchewan music industry. For me, it's a very heartfelt, like, sensitive topic though, because at the end of the day, it's like, I'm doing what I love, and I'm getting the support and the love and the appreciation from people that are Black, non-Black, whatever it is. But as a Black woman, as a Black gay woman, it's not I don't see a lot of me there, but I also know that there's a lot of us there as well that do the same thing. And it's not very, like, it's not very highlighted. It's not very, like, promoted in the sense that it could be. it's also
And what would you like to see as a solution?
inclusivity, like collaboration again, funding for specific Black arts, like Afro beats, Afro soul. Like I want to see the intention of the decision makers to actually invest in this genre, seeing how we get the reaction, right? And we're not just performing for the white crowd, like we're also performing to say this is who we are. And I have my brother here, I have my sister here, and like they do the same thing. Like I would want to see that, that is the solution. And I don't know what, like that's literally it for me. Like,
Amazing. That's perfect. And to the funders who are listening, and the ability to fail. The same ability that is given to artists from other genres to grow and fail and try again, and not just say, oh, we tried it and it just didn't work. So that's the end of it. Prince.
Yeah. I'd say biggest challenge that I've faced. I mean, if I'm thinking from a aspect of being both a producer and a manager, I'd say it's just avenues for artists to thrive. Whether it be financially, to be able to continue the process of growing. Because I mean, with a lot of artists, as you said, it takes a while to grow. You just don't become an artist and come out with the hit songs. You got to discover your sound and all that. And in order to stay in that creative environment, it'd be nice if we had specific funding for urban Black artists, to be able to at least record and stay creative, right? Because I think that's the biggest problem with a lot of people. They start going and then it starts getting expensive, and and it's tough, especially for studio owners who have to foot the bill just to keep the studio open, right? And it's still a business. And again, I think lastly, just more education on both ends, to the diverse communities about Black artists, Black music. I've been fortunate enough to be on Global News TV with Davy Sage and El Sly performing Afro beats, and that was kind of like the start to kind of building that awareness. But yeah, more awareness on both ends, and more funding for specific funding for urban Black artists.
I am. And actually, I want to ask you to do something for me. Can you please say your full name? Because a part of the problem in this understanding thing is the fact that many times, and I've mispronounced your name on this call once or twice myself, but we have to adapt to the spaces that we are in, as opposed to the spaces adapting to us. We've had to learn how to say Arnold Schwarzenegger and Martina Navratilova and Volkswagen. So we similarly should learn how to say your name, and we should not have to. This is what we talk about when we talk about showing up as our authentic selves. So could you please say your full name and then answer the question?
Yeah, it's gonna be funny because I know Prince is Nigerian, so Sochi. So I would say to people, Fian Falua Obayan, but there's like a Yoruba way of pronouncing it. And yeah, and then of course, like I think for stage name, I've gone by Fian Obayan, just to keep things simple. Yeah. But yeah, sorry. I think I'm trying to like collect my thoughts on like what the last question was that everyone's been answering.
What is the biggest issue that you've seen in your own personal career as a singer and songwriter who fuses jazz and gospel and R&B, and as somebody who's like performed in musicals and the spaces that you're in as a Black woman and as a musician and and as a music professional in Saskatchewan?
For sure. I think just generally finding spaces where the music fits, because again of the landscape. So I know like whenever I have, sang at like either venues or in like jazz festival, I always get really great feedback. But I think the idea of would I fit in, like there's other festivals in town, like but if I can't see that there's a representation in those festivals where I see artists like me, I'm more reluctant to apply to those, because I'm like, well, they might not get my music. And so I grew up going to like my friends' rock shows and stuff because that was who I was friends with. And so there wasn't really like, so for me, I found that I'm either like targeting places like Jazz Festival or the Basement, or like those, or festivals that might not say jazz, but I can tell there's something else going on there, or I'm creating my own. So I think that's been a challenge. And in terms of representation, similar, I feel like because I've had to do a lot of research and then people have reached out, and that combination of the two to get into these spaces, I see myself there. But I think of all the people in the shows that I've hosted in Black History Month, and especially for like Jazz Festival and some of these, like the Basement, I would like to see them bring into their lineup local, like those other artists, also bring in like Afrobeat. Like it would be really nice to see that in a jazz festival and have some of those local artists showcased as well, because there are some touring groups, but there's not really like showing the local talent that fits like what our festivals become almost like a world music festival. And I don't see a reason why they shouldn't also have a space as local artists. I feel like there's always a bit more room, even in a festival that's quote unquote named that, for some of these other genres that already get so much exposure. And it's almost like it's easier to be like, let's just book this other show rather than, oh, have we really looked at what we have? And so, yeah, but I guess personally for me, that's what I will say, is just trying to find the spaces where my music fits. And as a result, I've learned how to produce a lot of my own shows. Yeah.
The solution to that is for these festivals to bring in artists from varied spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think really expanding it, because I think like there is jazz there. Like, I guess to give some background, our festival has brought in like Lauryn Hill, John Legend. Like they know it on a massive level, and those shows have like sold out. Like they know on a mass scale level it works. But I find like locally, if they're using the local artists, like do they know about like the local, like Davey Sage with Afrobeat, or like, or yourself or Ricky? Like I've never seen like you guys from Regina, for example, be featured in those lineups as well. And I know we're one of the biggest, like we have one of the biggest jazz festivals in Canada, for example. So I think that there should be an opportunity to be like, why don't we have more of that in the stages as well?
Okay. And finally,
yeah, I would say as far as biggest barriers and issues, I do, I want to harp on it again. I do think funding is a thing. I think that mainly because a lot of these like travel opportunities. So I brought up Great Escape, or there's the other, or whatever. There's the ones in Germany. They're all over the place. All of these kind of like export festivals and things, the application process, the whatever. But I know, in my opinion, that a lot of these organizations do kind of have some kind of connection with the SaskMusic or whoever in these local environments is sending people out. So once again, I think having a representation, like some Black people on these boards or in these positions to say, hey, we need to make sure we're sending some Black people overseas, like just things like that, I think have always been a barrier, because never encountered it, never found the people that are saying, hey, let's send some Black people. Hey, you're a Black artist doing something. Let's get you in this festival. Let's get you on the show. Let's da 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 da. And then another barrier, like we haven't necessarily touched on it, but it was just kind of touched on by Fian. Was it Fian? Did I pronounce that correct? Fian?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, she did just basically touch on it, saying that the lack of representation puts us in a position where we are more reluctant. So I do also need, or feel the need to acknowledge, that sometimes these barriers are internal. We do sometimes project these barriers ourselves simply based on the lack of representation, and not maybe wanting to hear the first no or be the first person turned away or whatever. But it is something where, the more of us that kind of keep pile driving and showing up and making these demands that we kind of need that representation and need to be there, I think it'll make it easier for the people who come after us to say, hey, I belong there as well. I don't apply to perform at Folk Fest.
simply because of the name. Have I seen rap artists perform there that are Caucasian? Absolutely. You know, so it's like, as far as the thinking like whether or not my music may or may not belong somewhere, it is true that a lot of the times I internalize that it wouldn't belong there. So I almost kind of hold myself back in that step from really pursuing it. But that idea wasn't formulated in my head. That idea is actually representative of what I encounter in the world. And that is the lack of people like me in those positions or on those stages.
Yeah.
You know, so the solution, I think, once again, funding, get us on those, get our people in the positions to say, hey, pull more of us in, like, let's go, like, open up those doors, floodgate, like, let's go.
So like government support to these spaces for the inclusion of artists from such as yourself, basically. Perfect. Perfect. So I think
We're done.
we've reached the end of the we're over by about 18 minutes. But I'd like to thank you all today for your time, and thank you to SaskMusic, Advance, CIMA, BreakOut West. Did I miss anyone, Click?
Yeah, it just creative Saskatchewan. I think you already mentioned CIMA in advance. I will say that our efforts that we're doing here today is not just only in Saskatchewan. Like I mentioned earlier, we are doing this. We've done this already with Alberta Music. We're also doing another conversation with with British Columbia and then with Manitoba. But we also will be present at BreakOut West in Kelowna. October the 14th, we'll be having an in-person discussion with everybody attending in regards to the findings and what we've learned from these conversations with our community, and hoping that we can have an open dialogue with the industry about how we can make the changes that you guys have shared with us today. BreakOut West has extended passes to all of you here, our speakers, that is, to attend. So you know, if you guys want to go, there's a pass for you. And I've also, there was a comment from Deborah. I forwarded on. She wanted to forward her information to you guys, so I put that in the chat for you, for all of you guys. She works with the Nest Creek Music Festival, and I'm sorry we didn't get enough time to maybe focus on one of her comments, but it is something that I would like to bring up. But just for the future, SaskMusic is just, you know, talking about the demographics and the stats and data and what that looks like in Saskatchewan. We didn't get a chance to really talk a lot about that, but that is something that really needs to be pulled in regards to racial data, to really dig deeper into exactly what the landscape looks like, and how and what are those needs and whatnot. Thank you guys all of you for being here with us all this time, and everybody, all the participants that have been here. We really appreciate you. And this is being recorded and will be put up on YouTube for archival purposes. And yeah, Ian, any last thing to add there?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for attending. Thank you to SaskMusic for providing space for Black voices. And this has been Breaking Down Racial Barriers, BDRB.ca, and check out saskmusic.org.
Thank you guys for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you. It was awesome.
take care. All right, peace.
Bye-bye.